In this video, we're going to give you an overview of the steps to create the model and the toolpaths for the sign that you can see on the screen here. There is a companion tutorial to this that goes through the same process but in much more detail, so you may want to watch this first, and if you want to create your own version, you could watch the longer edition. So let's just go to File and close that down. And then I'm going to go and open an existing file, and from the shell sign project folder I'm going to open the shell sign vector file and press open. I'm just going to go into the 2D view control and look at tiling my windows vertically. That way we can see the 2D view on the left, and then any components that I create from these vectors, I can see those components in the 3D view on the right hand side. So we're going to start by going into the modeling tab. And then we're going to start creating the shapes that represent my base shapes. So to help me keep my component tree organised, I'm going to look at renaming this level. So I'm going to right mouse click, use the option to rename the level. By default it's always level 1, and I'm just going to rename this to base. And any components that I create now will be added to my base level. So I'm going to select this outer vector here, and then we're going to come over into the modelling tools and use the Create Shape from Vectors option. That's going to open up the Create Shape form. And with that vector selected, I can now go ahead and assign a shape profile along with an angle to create the shape. So I'm going to go with a curved profile, so I'm going to select that option there, and then for the angle I'm just going to look at using this slider. We can see over here in the 3D view I'm getting instant results every time I move that slider, and so that's going to help me determine what angle I'd like to use. So I'm going to go somewhere around 30 degrees. We can see that using the curved profile along with this angle and that vector, we've created this shape here. So I'm going to go and call this one Dome. Go ahead and press apply. We can close that down. We can see that now that has been added to our component tree. If I select that, we can see that the grayscale in the 2D view is now highlighted, along with the actual 3D model in the 3D view that's also highlighted. Let's put that back in Z. Then I'm just going to undraw the dome component for the time being, and now we're ready to go and create the component that will represent our border. So with that vector selected, I'm going to hold down Shift and select the inner vector here. With those vectors selected, we're going to go over to this option here, the second icon in the modelling tools, to create a 2-rail sweep. So in here we've got our 2 vectors selected, so we're going to use this option here to use selection, and that will change my vectors into drive rails. I then may need to move into this section here where I need to select my cross section. If I just zoom in on the 2D view, this is the cross section that I'd like to use to sweep between my 2 rails that I've already got selected here. So if that's selected, I can then work my way through the form. I'm going to uncheck Scale Cross Sections with Width, uncheck Sweep Between Spans, and uncheck Fill Center of Inner Closed Vector Rails. We're going to uncheck Scale to an exact height, so we're just going to go with the height that our vector currently is. I'm going to add that. We're going to call this component Border, and then if we press Apply and then Close, and then let's just take a look at that in the 3D view. We can see how that cross section has been swept around to create this decorative shape. So let's just put that back in Z, then we'll switch on the dome component. And so we can see the result of those being added together here in the 3D view. So now I'd like to import some pieces of clip art to finish off the design. So I'd like to use a ribbon that will look at blending into this bottom area of our base shape here. And so I'd like it to be the most prominent. And so to help me create that blend, I'm going to look at inserting a new level. So we're going to hover over the base level, right mouse click, use the option to insert a new level, right mouse click again. We're going to rename that level, and I'm going to call this level Banner. And I'm going to right mouse click again, and I'm going to change the combine mode of this to merge. And so now anything that I create in this level, any components that I make, will ultimately be merged with the composite model that we can see at the moment, so with the base level below it. And so with the banner level selected, I'm going to go over to the top of the modelling tools and use this option here to import a component or a 3D model. And from the Shell Signs project folder, I'm going to bring in the banner11.3d clip file and then press open. You can see that's been added to my banner level there. You can see that the grayscale is here at the bottom lower left hand corner, and we can see part of that component in our job space here. And so with that selected, I need to center that, so I'm going to go over to align selected objects. I'm going to align that to the center vertically and horizontally to my material, and we can see that's been moved there. Close that. With that still selected, I'm just going to go and size that, so we're going to change the size. I'm going to make the width of that 13 inches. I'm going to link XY, make sure that's checked so that it scales in proportion. Press apply. You can see that's instantly updated there. You can close that down. And then with that selected, I'd like to move it down so that it fits over the text that I've got here. So I'm going to come over to move selected objects. I'm going to move that relative to its current position, and then for the Y value we're going to put in -1.6, press apply, and that's going to move that down exactly 1.6 inches, and so now it's over the text that I've got there. So I'm happy with that, so we'll go ahead and press close here. If I just go and maximise the 3D view so we can take a look at that, we can see that the banner is being partially obscured by the base components. So I need to look at lifting this up a little. To do that, with that selected, I'm going to go over to the properties, and that will tell me some information about that component. I'm just going to reduce the shape height to 0.4. Then I'm going to add in a base height, so we're just going to apply a vertical height to the entire component of 0.15 inches, and then press space to enter that in, and we can see that that's been updated, and now the banner is the prominent component and the base shapes are sat nicely underneath there. So I'm going to close that down. I'm going to go to tile windows vertically, then we'll put that in the isometric view. So the next thing that I'd like to do now is put a piece of clip art on the top of my sign here. And so to do that, I'm going to enter a new level. So I'm going to hover over the banner level, right mouse click, use the option to insert a new level. I'm going to rename that by right mouse clicking, renaming the level. We're going to call this level Details. And then with that selected, we can see it's set to add, which is okay, as I'd like this component to add to the current composite models. We want this to sit on top of that dome shape that we've got here. Now, we looked at using the import component or a 3D model option earlier. The other way we could do this is by going into the clip art tab. I've already installed the clip art that comes with the software and added my folders, so I'm going to go to the decorative folder here. I'm just going to browse through all of those pieces of clip art that we've got available until I find the scallop shape that I like the look of. So here's the piece of clip art I'd like to use. I'm going to double click that. That will automatically put that in the center there for me. I'm going to go into the modeling tab, and then what I'd like to do now is just change the size of that. So let's go into set selected object size. For this I'm going to go with a width of 4.8. I'm going to press apply, close that down. You can see that's been updated. I'd like to move that up, so I'm going to use the move selected objects option. And I'd like to move this relative to its current position, 0.9 inches in Y, press apply, and we can see that's moved up exactly by 0.9 inches. You can close that down. And so you've seen me enter specific values in forms to alter the size or position of a component. You can just dynamically change that either in the 2D or the 3D view by going into the transformation mode. So that's by double clicking on a component until you can see the transformation handles, where I could easily look at rotating the component. I can move that, or even just look at altering the size. So let's just undo those three moves there just by going to edit, undo. So almost toolpath ready. There's just two things that I need to do. First I need to scale my model, so I'm just going to click deselect that component and then use this option here to scale the Z height of the model. We can see it's currently just below 0.8 inches here. I'm working with 3/4 inch material, so I'm going to alter the height of this by using the set exact height option here. So here I could just put in a value, say 0.55, press apply. We can see that that's been updated. We can also see that I still have enough detail and I haven't really lost too much detail, and I'm happy to go ahead with the new height here. So I'm just going to close that. Then we're going to go ahead and OK that. Now I need to create a vector to represent the area that we'd like to machine. So I'm just going to select this cross section, hold down Shift and select the two vectors that represent my base shapes. I'm going to right mouse click and then I'm going to use this option here to move to layer, to move that to a new layer. I'm going to move that to layer 2, I'm going to make that invisible and inactive. And so the layers are just a convenient way for me to organise my 2D data. So I'm going to go ahead and press OK here. So if we just go to the Layers tab, we can switch that off, switch on Layer 2, we can see that we haven't lost those vectors, they've just been moved to Layer 2. Switch that off and switch on Layer 1 again, and go into the Modelling tab. I'm just going to select all of these by box selecting those, and then we're going to use this option here to create a vector boundary. And then if I just click in the white space, we can see that that vector boundary has been applied around the outside of our composite model. So now we're ready to go ahead and create our toolpaths. So let's go into the 2D view control and switch over to the toolpaths tab. So that's just going to minimize our design tab on the left and then open up the toolpaths tab on the right hand side. So the first thing that we need to do is set up our material. And so this is how we relate our setup to the actual setup on the machine. So for this we're going to set our Z0 on top of the material block. We're going to go with a material thickness of 3/4 of an inch. We're going to move down and choose where we position our XY position. In this case we're going to put that in the lower left hand corner. That way all of my X and Y values will be positive. We move on to the model position in material. So this is where I'd like to leave a small gap above my model of 0.05. Then we check the rapids and the home start positions and ensure that they're safe. And if you plan to actually machine the examples shown in this tutorial, then it's very important that you calculate all the toolpaths using parameters and settings that are safe and appropriate for your particular machine, the tooling that you have available and the material that you are using. So once we're happy with those, we could go ahead and press OK here. And so the first toolpath we're going to create is the 3D roughing toolpath. So I'm going to select that vector that we just created over here. I'm going to come over to the toolpath operations and select the 3D roughing toolpath. So in here I select my tool, so I'm going to use the select option here. That will open up the tool database. I'm going to choose the 1/4 inch end mill. I'm going to check the settings in here, I'm happy with those, so I'll go ahead and press OK. I'm going to use the selected vector, that vector that we just created here. I'm going to put in a offset here of 0.18 just so that the tool can come past the part and cut down the sides of our model. Machine allowance we'll put to 0.03. Roughing strategy we're going to C-level raster X, and we'll come down, give that a name, so we're going to call that 3D roughing sign. Go ahead and press calculate. You can see that has calculated that for us, and these blue lines represent that toolpath. You'll see that we've also opened up the preview toolpaths form, so the software has automatically done that, in which we could go ahead and preview that toolpath, and it's just going to give us a simulation in our virtual piece of wood of how that's going to look when we cut that out on our machine. So we can see how that looks. So I'm happy with that, so we'll go ahead and press close here, go to view, and we'll go and tile our windows vertical, and with that vector still selected we're going to come over and create our 3D finishing toolpath. And for this I'm going to use an 1/8 inch ball nose. I can see that's already selected, so I'm going to come down into the machine limit boundary. Again, we're going to use the selected vector. I'm going to put in a small offset this time of 0.08, so it's just a little bit bigger than the radius of the tool. Area machine strategy, we're going to raster that, so it's going to go back and forth. I'm just going to put in a raster angle of 90 degrees. We'll call that 3D finish sign. Go ahead, press calculate. Again, the software is just going to work that out for us, and we can see that blue area represents that toolpath. So if I go ahead, maximize the 3D view and preview that toolpath, you can see that we're getting a simulation of how that's going to look when we machine that. Okay, so I'm happy with that. You can see we've got some nice clean detail in there, and so I can go on and think about my next toolpath. So I'm going to go ahead and close that down. I'm going to go to View, use the option to tile Windows Vertical. This time I'm going to select my text. So the text, what we're going to do with that is we're going to come over and V-carve that. I'm going to put in a start depth of 0. I'm going to use the 90 degree 1/2 inch V-bit here, so I'll press OK there. And then I'm going to use this option here to project the toolpath onto the 3D model. We're going to call this V-carve sign. Go ahead, press calculate. Again, we can see that toolpath preview there, and then if I preview that toolpath, you can see how that would look. So if we maximize that, you can see that I have nice clean text there, so I'm happy with that. We can go and close that down, go back to View. We're going to tile our Windows Vertical, and then I'm going to create my last toolpath, which is our cutout toolpath. So I'm going to select that boundary vector we created earlier. We're going to come over to the toolpath operations. We're going to use the profile toolpath option. So in here I'm going to go and specify a cut depth. So we're going to go with 3/4 of an inch, as we want to cut all the way through the material. The tool we'd like to use is the 1/4 inch end mill. You can see that that's already selected there. Then I can move down to machine vectors. I'm going to machine outside of that vector. We're not going to add tabs to this toolpath. I have appropriate hold down for this, so I don't need to put in any tabs. I'm just going to give that a name. We'll call that profile sign. Go ahead, calculate that, and we can see that there if I maximize the 3D view. So we can see the toolpath represented by those blue lines there. If I preview that toolpath, we can see how that's going to look. If I just double click on the waste material, we can see the exact sign that we should get when we cut that out on our CNC machine. And so it's always important that you do preview toolpaths. I can see exactly how this is going to look if I cut that out on my machine. If I didn't like the look of anything here, then I could always go back into those individual toolpaths and edit those until I'm happy, or go back to the design and edit the design. And until I'm happy with that toolpath preview, then I'd start to think about taking these toolpaths and cutting them out on my CNC machine. So at this stage, what I could do is I could go over and save a preview image, which I can then go and send to my customer as a proof before I go ahead and cut that file. So I just give that a name and just save that. We can close that down, and so now we're ready to go and save out those toolpaths. So to do that, I'd go ahead and select the 3D roughing sign toolpath, use this option here to save the toolpath, make sure that that toolpath that is selected is listed here in the toolpaths to be saved. I'd then go ahead and select my post processor. If you've already selected a post processor in a previous session, then it will automatically be saved to the one that you used previously. And then you'd go ahead and just save that out, and then this is the file that you'd go and take to your CNC machine and run that on. So let's just cancel that, and then I'd go through the others, see that the 3D finish sign is selected, and then I'll go ahead, press save, and I'll do the same for V-carve. I can see that there, press save, and so on. So I can close that down. I'm just going to go back into the preview there. And so that completes this tutorial. As I mentioned at the start, this is just an overview of the process. There is a companion tutorial to this that goes through the same steps but in much more detail. So if you're interested in following along and creating your own version, then we'd recommend that you watch that tutorial.